Welcome to Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Ekiyor, and today I have the honor of having a renowned author, a PBIS and MTSS expert with us, Dr. John Hannigan. I have one of his books here that is a must-have for educators. I am using it and find it very useful. Behavior Solutions, Teaching Academic and Social Skills through RTI at Work. Dr. Hannigan, welcome and thank you so much for honoring our invitation.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
What got you into education?
My family's educator, so growing up, I swore that was not the pathway I was going to take. It was a funny thing. I was about 3/4 done with a business finance degree at the university. It wasn't until I was the actual Fresno State mascot, the bulldog for our university. And so it requires a lot of school visits. During a lot of those school visits, I was like, these kids are kind of cool. And so switched my major, became a teacher, and just fell in love with education. That started the path as an instructional coach and then a school site principal, or even at the secondary and elementary levels. So I've gotten to and supporting juvenile justice system. So even working in juvenile hall. So I've seen from the youngest to even the most at risk of the older students as well. And just became passionate about not just educating students, but then even behavior, because that's where I saw that was the ticket where students were checked out of the educational experience to make those connections and reach those students. Supporting behavior became my passion through education.
So, yes, we know this challenge about changing mindsets from reactive to preventive or proactive methods, being intentional in schools. And we've been doing this reactive piece for so long and we're not getting anywhere. How, in your own experience, or how would you describe how MTSS-B can help shift schools from that reactive to preventive when it comes to behavior?
And that's something common that I see working with schools across the country, but even in my own experience as a site administrator, is our staff viewed those tiers of support as who can we send them to, or here's their punishment, increasingly punitive reactions, instead of these are supports for any student that demonstrates these needs. And so what was an eye-opening experience for me as a principal is we handed out a blank MTSS pyramid to our teachers and said, what do you think we do here? Because a lot of the perception was I sent a kid to the office, he comes back 10 minutes later with this teddy bear and a starburst. And that's not what this is. They couldn't tell us what supports were in place to support students behaviorally. And so that was an education opportunity for us as an admin team to then really communicate these are the supports that we have in place. What that also did is it showed that we were prepared for anything and everything. Sometimes what we'd also see is teachers are like, one more year and then Bobby's going to the middle school, or one more year and then Bobby's leaving our middle school, going to the high school. Crossing our fingers and hoping is not a strategy. What we wanted to do was plan and prepare for anything. Because yeah, Bobby might be going to the middle school, but guess what? Brandon just moved in. So preparation's always going to be planning. That's based on that expectation of order. Everything. But when you plan for order, you're going to get eaten alive by chaos. Preparation is based on the expectation of chaos. We already know that this isn't going to be Disneyland. We know that we're going to have some behavior needs on this campus. But what are we going to do to support them? So once we put that plan in place, so we were ready for anything. And once we communicated to our staff, these are the supports waiting for any student, that allowed them to roll up their sleeves, support students with that tier 1 prevention, because they knew that they were part of a context that was inclusive and supportive around behavior, and it allowed them to feel supported with that student behavior. And so planning for chaos, we were ready for anything. It wasn't a reaction to behavior.
So you see, in the conference in Phoenix, when I was listening to you facilitating the training, I was wondering how does this play in with diverse learners? In this show, we are particular about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD. It's a group that most times are forgotten because the characteristics are, if you juxtapose them with our traditional classroom rules, you find out that those characteristics are the ones that we see as inappropriate behaviors in the classroom. For instance, wait your turn, sit still, the crisscross applesauce, like most people say it.
Right.
So, how can MTSS-B, right, create an inclusive environment for them? Yes.
And that's something that I think a lot of schools are looking for. When you plan for order, that's when you're going to get eaten alive by chaos. And so sometimes when we talk in binary, it's either a 0 or 1. Then it turns into that power struggle where, like you said, crisscross applesauce or being loud or different things like that. And that's where we see some of these misconceptions of implementing programs or some of these behavior initiatives that we see, instead of what's the framework that's inclusive for everything, which is MTSS, and sometimes it's that program. As you heard me mention in Phoenix, there's only 6 behavior initiatives nationwide, and all of them fit within that MTSS framework. It's character education, social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching, trauma-informed practices, restorative justice, and PBIS. So all of those have a home in MTSS, but sometimes we see is we'll abandon one of those initiatives and then go pursue that next shiny object. To answer your question around how does this work to support students, especially in diverse communities, creating those equitable learning outcomes for all students, that's where something like a culturally responsive practices, our staff trained using culturally relevant teaching and behavior expectations that are going to reflect our students' backgrounds, that we're using curriculum where students see themselves in our literature, in how we're teaching. So even framing things through our community values and how respect is also framed through our cultural lens. When we talk in binary, it's either this way or that way. Anything outside of that, then it's going to be met with a consequence or punishment. Same with PBIS. Yeah, it establishes clear, consistent behavior expectations school-wide, where sometimes you'll see be respectful, be responsible, be safe, and it's reinforced with rewards. But as we're establishing those clear, consistent behavior expectations, couldn't we also allow for student voice? Couldn't students be part of what that sounds like? Instead of talking in binary code of loud, could we also include like voice levels of a voice level of 1, 2, and 3, and then practice? What's the difference of each of those? Instead of just my interpretation of loud is going to be different from someone else's, and now I'm punishing students because our interpretation is different? Are we using flexibility and grace? That do we have opportunities where students can use a standing desk or things like that, that it's not just direct instruction for 60 minutes and you got to sit on the carpet quietly for 60 straight minutes? Adults, as you saw the session that you attended, it was a 90-minute session. If you didn't have opportunities to interact or to stand or be engaged, as adults, we would have been bored to tears or got up and walked out. Even as adult learners, we also expect movement, brain breaks, opportunities to engage with others. But sometimes it's we're going to sit in rows, you got to be quiet, and anything outside of that's going to be met with punishment. Anyway, tying it back to MTSS and where a lot of these behavior initiatives that we see folks adopt, do they know why we're adopting them? What are culturally responsive practices? Trauma-informed practices where I'm not going to engage in power struggles, where my calm is going to meet that storm. It's not going to be, that's it, you're out for talking back to me or things like that. And so ways to de-escalate situations, to not engage in power struggles, each of those initiatives plays a role and it all fits within MTSS.
Let's talk about the tiered system. It was a light bulb for me listening to you describe how each works together to achieve student success. Can you describe how these tier systems, the strategies, what they are and how they work towards creating an inclusive environment for students.
Sure. So that tier one, that's first best prevention. Like my mentor always says, the best intervention is prevention. And so what are we doing universal, class wide, to help students, whether it is particularly those with ADHD or all students, by promoting structure and engagement? So having clear routines and expectations, consistent daily schedules, classroom rules, if we so to speak, that we want to call. What that does is it reduces that uncertainty that from room to room on our campus, or especially at the secondary level where I have 6 or 7 periods in a school day, if everyone's got a different set of explicitly teaching of what the adults expect, you're going to get a lot of variability from room to room. Clear routines and expectations help students with ADHD stay on track by reducing that uncertainty, posting that visual schedule and reviewing it daily. Those are things that take that uncertainty out, or having some of those active learning techniques, like I just said, even as adult learners, by incorporating movement. So the younger they are, they're going to need more brain breaks or standing desks or hands-on activities, or manipulatives in math can help cater to that need for stimulation. If that's something that could help improve my focus, for if I'm a student with ADHD, or even, and I know you, as you said, PBIS, and sometimes PBIS gets a bad rap for being only about that reinforcement, and sometimes the reinforcement can just hijack that entire
Mm-hmm.
initiative where it's just praise and rewards. Whether it's a token economy in my classroom or class dojo with points, help also encourage self-regulation with students where we are giving that immediate specific feedback does also work best for students with ADHD. But also, am I chunking my lessons into smaller, manageable segments with those frequent checks for understanding? That prevents that overwhelm, or even helps students sustain that attention as opposed to a 60-minute direct instruction. So just, are we incorporating these things in just my regular classroom routines? That's just a classroom designed for first best prevention. But then I also need to also acknowledge that there's going to be students that need some targeted, some very specific support. So that's where tier two comes in. These are things not for everyone in my class, but maybe for a student or two. So if I've if I have a student that maybe I want to help them keep track of their own attention or behavior, building that awareness, that self-awareness, we can have some self-monitoring tools. So if I'm blurting out in class, I can have something where I stay in the green, yellow, or red zone, and I'm monitoring how many times I'm blurting out or those impulsive things. So I'm self-monitoring. I'm not doing it for everyone in my class, but that's a tool in tier two that I'm just doing in addition to the rest of my class for a specific student. Or I might have preferential seating or a behavior contract where they can earn extra computer time, or something that's going to provide some motivation and structure. But then tier three is going to be a lot more intensive, a lot more individualized, where it might be a class break or a card system to replace some of those escape driven outbursts that a student may have. You see how it goes from how am I designing my class first best prevention? Here's something that I'm going to do for an individual student, but then here's something that's going to be very individualized as far as the way that I'm supporting the student to keep them in the learning environment. Oftentimes, what we see is we don't have those structures in place in tier one, and it then becomes more of that's it, get out. And then it's just those exclusionary practices where students come back more disenfranchised, more disconnected, and that cycle just keeps continuing.
So, when we talk about these tiered systems, most times people talk about them as if they are in silos. Oh, tier 1 students, tier 2 students, tier 3 students. Is that how we're supposed to look at it? How would you describe the workings of that system of supports?
And so, one of the practices that we had, similar to how back around 2010, 11, if you remember when instructional rounds was the popular thing to do, everyone was doing instructional rounds where we're looking at what instructional practices. We actually adopted something very similar, but we call them behavior rounds. And so that's our tier 1 students, tier 2 students. That is a misconception that I see with a lot of, we label a behavior to a student where it's more of what are the tier 1 supports that I'm putting in place to support 95% of my class? What are those tier 2 supports that I might be doing in addition to the rest of my class, maybe for a few students that aren't responding to those tier 1 supports? And then what are the tier 3 supports that I have in place for a student that's going to be a lot more individualized, because what worked with Bobby isn't going to work with Brandon. So it's just that relentlessness to try things that students will respond to. Through those behavior rounds, what we wanted to see was, do we have a classroom that's really set up for success? When we go into a class and ask a teacher, okay, your principal walks through the door, what are they looking for? And you'll probably hear, I got my learning targets posted on the board, or small group instruction. Their brains are going to go straight to academic. But if we were to ask them, what are some of those tier 1, just classroom management, prevention strategies, and you're going to hear a wide range of things. So as a school, have we created a menu that we're also supporting our students through site-embedded professional learning? Here's the 3rd grade team that really does this well. Can we spotlight them at a staff meeting? Most of our credentialing classes are built on pedagogy, lesson planning, intervention around academics, but very small on supporting students with behavior. Most people, if they were like me, they got the Dr. Harry Wong book the first days of school and the keys to their class, and that was it. And then we're left to just figure it out on our own. And then we work in silos when it comes to behavior, but then when it comes to collaborating on what instructional practices worked, what didn't, how we respond to support students with our common formative assessments, we do that stuff around academics, but then everyone's left to just figure it out on their own when it comes to behavior. The response school-wide should be the same, that we respond as a professional learning community around supporting students behaviorally. But we also have our school psychs, counselors, social workers, interventionists that are on our campus that also fit within that multi-tiered system of supports and take collective responsibility to support students. As a classroom teacher, I'm not going to put best practices in place, and then when students are working outside of what I perceive them to, what the good kids should just normally be doing, and if you're outside of that, we're going to send you to then those critical experts. They support prevention, they support tier 2 intervention, and they support obviously the tier 3 remediation. But that's where roles and responsibilities needs to have a big focus as well. Flipped answer.
No, that's great. When you mentioned Harry Wong, even in the conference, I was like, yeah, I remember when I got my first classroom, an empty space with Harry Wong, and everybody expected magic. That's interesting. Now, let's go to school leaders, right? How can we create equitable environments using MTSS in our, especially urban schools where you have, a district with almost 20 something thousand students, a school with over 1,000 students, the high school with almost, some high schools are like colleges. Teachers treat the kids like they're in college. How can MTSS help to create that kind of inclusive and equitable environment?
Now, don't hold me to this. Research here to support this. This is from my personal and professional experience. When I see elementary school teachers, it's based on, I have a multiple subject credential. And typically that lens they look through in teaching is, I teach kids. When we look at secondary, I have a single subject credential. I teach math. It's a different lens. I haven't seen that transfer. Of course, I've seen secondary teachers that do have that heart that I teach kids also. But with that single subject lens, sometimes it's, I am a content specific teacher. It's more of that college professor lecturing that here's my lesson. I'm the teacher, you're the student. That's the role, that's the relationship. When we see students misbehaving or their behaviors aren't in alignment to what we as the adults expect, it's met with, I'm done. I'm not dealing with this today. Get out. It's not, let's roll up our sleeves and build a relationship, or how do I connect with this kid in this moment? I do see that at the alt ed sites, though. I worked in the juvenile justice system. I also support a lot of secondary alt ed sites. When a student says F you to their teacher, they're like, partner, what's going on, man? Is everything okay? What do you need from me? How can I better support you? Those educators is typically not a, you can't talk to me like that, get out. It's met with a lot more grace and empathy. But at the comprehensive sites, I don't know where that disconnect comes in, and that's where I wish I could clone my alt ed site folks and put them at those comprehensive sites, because they don't take it personal. If a kid's having a bad day, or hey, partner, take off your hoodie when you walk in my classroom, and the student says F you and storms out, and it's, whoa, you can't talk to me like that, as opposed to, partner, what's going on? It's sometimes framed through that lens of, I'm the math teacher, you're the student, I'm a single subject. But that sometimes is where I see that dynamic, where it becomes a, you're going to sit there and learn and do as I tell you, as opposed to, how can I connect with these kids, similar to how we see at the elementary schools or even at those alt ed sites. That's just my personal experience working with over 5,000 schools across the country. That I'm not trying to overgeneralize, but at those levels, that is typically where I see the, you'll do it because I told you, I'm the teacher, you're the student. My humble opinion. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Is that something that you see a lot? I know
Yes,
that's not.
it's something that is common here too. That's why I'm bringing it up. High schools, even middle schools, you walk in and you're like, wait a minute, am I in a college classroom? It's direct instruction. You listen to me, you sit down. It can be challenging, but yeah, thank you for that.
I do want to back it up with some research, though. I do a lot of empathy interviews at those alt ed sites where I'm like, partner, what's going on? Tell me, what got you here? And sometimes it's absolutely heartbreaking. What I'll hear is, in my third period class, I was struggling with this math lesson. I asked for help, and then you didn't raise your hand, so go sit outside and finish the rest of it. I came back in and said I was done. He said it wasn't done right, sent me back again. I just made some little snarky comment under my breath, got sent to the office, came back tomorrow, even more disenfranchised, even more upset, made some snarky comment, kicked me out again. The cycle continues, 26 of those, or whatever that magic number is. Now, guess what? Now, that school site, you've had X amount of referrals from period 3. We're putting you at this alt ed campus. And so I'm like, so tell me what happened. Well, like first, second period, fourth, fifth, sixth period, what was going on there? Nothing. I was getting good grades and got along with those teachers. So you're telling me that just locking horns, button heads with just your third period teacher, now you're at this alt ed campus where, you know, that pathway back for some campuses I've seen, it's like a semester plus 1. So let's say this happened now 2 weeks after Christmas break. Now I've missed all of the rest of my 11th grade year, and I'm not coming back till after Christmas my 12th grade year. These are some serious repercussions for some of these things where students don't have an opportunity back, or sometimes those transition meetings where the student has done what they need to do to return back to that comprehensive site. And it's like, what's he doing back? I don't want that kid back on my campus. In front of the kid and their family. And these are just common things that we see, and it's heartbreaking because nothing communicates to a child, you don't matter, we don't care, I don't have time for you, more than adult behaviors like that. So those are empathy interviews are powerful. How can we seek to understand a student's experience in the environments we're creating for them?
So, what will be your advice to leaders to ensure that MTSS is not just a buzzword, but something real that changes school culture?
First and foremost, what do you have for Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3? These are value added. Some students are going to need all 3. And how are we creating the structures for these students to thrive on our campuses? And how are we communicating that to our teachers so they also feel supported? I get it. Behavior is emotional. And that's where It feels like as a classroom teacher, it's just landed on me, and there is not a plan on this campus for these behaviors. That's a lonely place for me as a classroom teacher dealing with challenging behaviors. I need to know that we do have a plan, that I am being supported, that I am having some tools in my toolbox when I'm seeing that I'm running out of tools, and that it's not a program, it's not a who can we send them to. It is we take the collective responsibility to support students on this campus. It's aligned to our vision, why we exist as a school, our purpose. As a principal, know why you're doing it. It's not a program. This is the framework that's inclusive of whatever behavior initiatives you have in place, where each of these structures live by team, by tier, by role, by goal, and effectively communicating so teachers aren't feeling like nothing's being done.
There might be educators, leaders listening to you right now and wondering, yeah, we know this, but we are struggling to get this off the ground. What will be your advice? What would you say? Do this, try this, and this is what is demanded of you to get it going.
My biggest recommendation, and honestly, when we typically think of like the research around RTI, we're all familiar with the 80, 15, 5, right? With the tier 1, 80%, tier 2, 15%, tier 3, 5. So whether you're looking at the University of Oregon or the Florida RTI network, typically what we see is that 80, 15, 5. I have not seen that to be the case for behavior. When you start peeling those layers and looking at some of those studies cited in the research, it's like a fourth grade reading intervention or things like that. And then it just becomes generalized to the whole multi-tiered system of supports as 80, 15, 5 for academics and behavior. If you're doing tier 1, 95% of your campus will respond to that. That leaves 4% in tier 2, 0.5 to 1% in tier 3. So if you're a school and you're like, I need to get this off the ground, that biggest investment, that return on your investment you're going to see is that tier 1. 95% of my campus responding, that's a good place to be, because now that 4%, we should just expect it. You're going to have 4% of your campus that's just going to need more. So let's say I got 500 kids on my campus. That's 20 kids. That's doable. I can't have half my kids on my campus needing a behavior intervention. You won't have the bandwidth, the manpower, the people, the resources to do that. Which then leaves, let's say I'm still that school with 500 students. Tier 3's 2 or 3 kids. Again, that's manageable. I get it. Those 2 or 3 are going to make your school feel like it's on fire and take up 95% of your time as a principal. But what it can't be is 20 kids and feeling like half my school. So think of 95, 4, 1. If half my school needs an intervention, look at what tier is producing these undesirable results. That's where you need to focus. So that's where, think of that distribution. Because we work with schools in Texas that have 6,000 students at the high school. If they stuck to 80, 15, 5, 15% of 6,000 is 900. There is no way on God's green earth that any school can support 900 kids in tier 2. But that's what they would say would be a normal distribution, sticking to that 80, 15, 5. Honestly, even 4% is going to be a large number, but they will also have the manpower and the bandwidth to be able to support 4%, even with 6,000 kids. So to get back to the question, as far as if you're struggling to implement, where do you start? Start with, what's that distribution? How many students you got on your campus? What would 4% of that be? That's what you should typically expect. It'll need a little bit more with tier 2. If you're seeing anything outside of that, you don't have an intervention problem. You got a what we're doing all day long problem, as Mike Matos would say.
Thank you so much. Now, most times when we talk about the multi-tiered system of supports around behavior, academics, or cell, it's abstract to some people. Can you tell us a success story based on what you're doing that people can refer to motivate those who are on track right now to keep pushing and those who are not to revisit what they're doing, and figure out if they are doing it right?
I'll share one of just a couple of years ago. We were called in to support a high school, and they had a ninth grade girl fentanyl overdose, 9:30 in the morning. Ninth grade girl, non-breathing, non-responsive. The paramedics said if that principal didn't have Narcan, that kid would have died. That same school had a 32 student fight where 12 teachers were injured. It was like out of a movie. They were beside themselves, like they had lost all hope. To then putting these structures in place at the end of just that year of year one, implementing in their conference room, going around as a roundtable, they were in tears. It just feels different. Like we've got control of our campus again. And it's just that intentionality of having that structure, order, as the adults, showing these students what we, the adults, expect, and then supporting them, and then having those supports in tier 2 and tier 3. Once again, going back into that 95-4-1 distribution, that ratio, it is doable, and it didn't feel like it was just this daunting task and we've lost control of our campus. To now, 3 years later, they're one of the models in their county, not this campus. I can't even imagine they were like that ever. So that's just one example. We worked with another school in Arizona that had 30 kids in tier 2 on a large high school campus. 25 of them have exited their behavior academies. You could go down to individual stories of student success, comprehensive to alt ed sites. It's just when we're intentional of teaching behavior similar to how we teach academics, you see those results. Fear and punishment doesn't work. Exclusionary practices don't work. A bully doesn't stop being a bully because you send him home for 3 days. All I've done, you've done nothing to prevent that from happening again. But when we teach, make those connections with kids, showing them that we believe in you and we're here to support you because we care, they'll rise to the challenge and they'll respond.
You see, instruction. What is instruction? Teaching. We cannot, at that tier 1 level, try to separate academic, behavior, and cell, because they are intertwined. Good teaching practices. You cannot teach if you don't have an environment that supports teaching. You cannot teach if the kids are not ready to listen to you, or if you don't know the kids, or if you don't know what they are presenting. Instruction, I always say, it's teach, teach, teach. You teach behavior like you teach academic, like you teach cell, whatever you want to call it. If you want people to meet up to your expectations, they have to understand what your expectations are, and you have to prepare them with the tools to be able to meet up to your expectation. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Hannigan. If there are educators listening, as we're wrapping up this interview, what will be one thing that you want them to walk away with when it comes to MTSS-B and inclusion practices? What will be one thing you want them to walk away with that could be actionable?
What would you want for your own child? And so I get it, behavior is emotional. But if that were your own child, how would you want those educators on your child's campus to support your child if they were struggling? So we teach behavior similar to how we teach academics. So when a student struggles to read, we target exactly where that reading's breaking down, whether it's vowel blends and digraphs, and we give that student a double dose of vowel blends and digraphs and get them reading. But when a student struggles to behave, it's usually met with punishment. I also want to remind people, the word discipline has two meanings. You go to look in the Webster Dictionary, discipline, it means to punish for the sake of enforcing obedience, or to teach. I don't know if there's another word in the English language that one word has two completely opposite meanings. But obviously, Dr. Stanley, yourself, me, we definitely echo the definition number 2 is to teach. And so continue to educators. One key takeaway for MTSS-B, those inclusive practices, what would we want for our own students? Sometimes when we're thinking, there's no more discipline or no more, discipline means to teach. If we're going to be intentional of what we want our students to demonstrate on our campus, we need to show them what we, the adults, expect of them, and then teach them when we see anything that's not in alignment with what we expect.
Great. Thank you so much. Attending that conference was so beneficial to me. Listening to you really break it down step by step by step and putting it together was magical. What is the next opportunity? If there's somebody listening and thinking, what is he talking about? What is the next opportunity in the calendar for you to be either around the East Coast, a conference in the East Coast, where people can actually come and see you do what I experienced?
I love that. So we have actually just got back last night from our 2-day workshop in Minneapolis, a virtual opportunity of our 2-day workshop. So it's split over 2 days that are consecutive Wednesdays. That's, I think, late April, early May coming up. It's within the next month or so. We have another one coming up next month in Iowa, but then there's also some opportunities. Go on the Solution Tree website, but also if virtual means we can meet you where you're at. They also have global PD, so that it'll take some bite-sized chunks that you can process through the content at your own pace. But the Solution Tree website will give you some ways of seeing where we'll be for either those RTI institutes like you got to see in Phoenix, or the 2-day Behavior Solutions workshop. Or check out the books, Behavior Solutions or Behavior Academies, and we got one cooking in the oven right now, Behavior Intensives for Tier 3. Expect that next.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. I know you must have been impressed with Dr. Hannigan's insightful experience and expertise. I am honored to have him share what we can do. Keep it simple. Understand the framework. Give those that are working with you the tools. If you are a policymaker, if you are an educator, let them have the tools. Accountability depends on accountable tools. If you don't provide the tools for them to be accountable, then accountability becomes a problem. And if those that are delivering the vessels that we want to support our kids are not prepared, don't understand, don't have the resources to support the process, then we'll keep going through this cycle. Thank you so much, Dr. Hannigan. We truly appreciate your insight, and we hope we'll have another opportunity of inviting you in to share your experience and expertise.
Thanks for the opportunity. I loved every minute of it. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so we're going to wrap up today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you all again in our next episode. Meanwhile, share, make comments, and let us know what you think so that we can improve on what we're doing. If you have experiences, that would be great for us to share and collaborate so that we can keep stitching one step at a time and bridge the gap between what we have today and actually creating inclusive classrooms where every kid can get what they need to excel. Thank you so much, educators, for what you do. It's not easy being an educator. I'm proud of being one, and I'm sure Dr. Hannigan, you can see from his passion how proud he is of being an educator. Keep doing what you're doing, and we wish you the best and have a wonderful day.